what's going on, everybody out there? This is Jakejames Lugo. Welcome to the channel and welcome to a brand new episode of JJ's One Man Podcast. I know this is a random episode, but I'm super fired up because of a number of different reasons, but least of which is the topic we're going to dive into now. So I have to say that if you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Make sure you leave a like on this video, leave a comment down below, giving your thoughts on this discussion, because this one's going to be a meaty one. It's going to be a real good one for most of you out there. Now, I'm a little fired up because I was listening and watching a video from ReviewTechUSA, Rich, a buddy of mine on Twitter. I saw his video on his YouTube channel, and he was talking to his editor, Jay, and they were talking about a situation that had gone down with RGT89 or 85 or RGT85. I always mess up his name because it's like a tongue twister, right? So if you didn't already know, he's been going through some things with Nintendo because he ended up getting footage, I believe it was of Metroid Dread or the Switch OLED before Street Date, where he actually got content and got stuff from it by breaking the Street Date. And he ended up finding himself in a situation where Nintendo was trying to come after his footage, and them and YouTube went back and forth and all this different stuff, right? Now, the conversation with Rich and his editor was basically about, okay, who's really in the wrong here and what's really going to go down? Now that pretty much RGT85 did his video, he's talked about it, Rich has talked about it, all the information is out there. And it was very interesting because Jay, his editor, was giving some insight as someone that's been in the industry covering games and reviewing games for a long time, over a decade. He has just about as much time as I do. I think he's probably got like a year or a couple months more than me. But the thing is that he was saying a lot of the same stuff. And they were talking about a lot of the same stuff that I have been saying and trying to tell people for a very long time, for years. And what's funny is that even though a lot of people just ignore me, a lot of people just don't believe me, they always say like they're going to other people saying one thing or another, it's finally hilarious and like relieving and satisfying that some other person who just knows just as much about this stuff as I do is saying the exact same thing I've been saying all along. It's downright hilarious. But either way, I left a comment on Rich's video talking about some other stuff, and which I'm going to get into now, but hopefully if you watch this video, if you listen to this, hopefully you checked out the comment. But I wanted to offer my own perspective on this because there's a couple other things that they didn't really get into that I do want to mention, but also validate a lot of what they were saying. Because the main thing that I always tell people, especially content creators, YouTubers, Twitch streamers, or podcasters, or whatever have you, if you're a writer, if you're a part of a website, all this different stuff, if you're not part of traditional media and you find yourself like trying to get games early and trying to review games and make content about them and working with publishers and PR and stuff, if you find yourself in a situation when you're breaking Street Date somehow, like you got a copy of a game early or you got hardware early, don't tell people about it. Don't say nothing. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's hilarious to me that, again, just finally somebody else besides me has been saying this. And so what do I mean by that? The main thing that Rich and Jay were getting into, and what I've been telling other people for a long time, is that when you're a content creator, and especially also if you're a member of the media, if you're under a website and you're under a masthead, you're trying to build a relationship with PR, not because you're trying to cater to what the companies are doing, but because you have access with them. You not only have the ability to get games early, through review units or review copies or getting hardware early before release in order to make content on it. So that way your audience and a lot of the people that follow you and your content could check that out. It puts you in that echelon of people that are able to put out stuff like, be part of the hype cycle a little bit, which is a good and a bad thing, mostly bad, especially if you care about ethics. But it's really more about having your content there on the front line alongside everybody else when things are relevant, when things are important. Now, granted, there's some nuanced stuff to that, like obviously with like retro games and games that you cover later on with people that still have like big audiences that follow their content. That's neither here nor there. We're strictly focusing on stuff when it comes to breaking Street Date, when it comes to early access, review copies, and stuff like that. In application, how it's relevant to what's going on with RGT85 and Nintendo. And I also said this, which really Jay and Rich didn't really get into, but one of the things that is also relevant to this entire situation is also part of the terms of service that's in Nintendo games specifically. And a lot of Nintendo content creators don't seem to understand this, even though they play a ridiculous amount of Nintendo games. All you have to do is just look at the actual terms of service, which is on Nintendo's website, and even on the back of the manuals of games that you get, or at least games that have a manual inside of them. Nintendo has the right to really kind of come after you and take down a content that you make because you agree to that. It's been part of a thing where you won't be able to use their content or their intellectual property in any way, or at least the game that you purchase, outside of playing it in any way that Nintendo deems unfit. Now, obviously, I'm not wording it the right way. Like, if you want the actual legalese and like the description of this stuff, all you have to do is just look at that stuff. You could find it on Nintendo's website right now, especially with the updated version of it that applies to content creators and to streamers, which was, I believe it was updated, I want to say maybe about a couple years ago, give or take. It was a whole big deal. I know Rich would know what I'm talking about specifically, but you could go see that now for yourself. But the point is that most of the time, besides all the legal stuff that goes along with it, most of the time, Nintendo's always going to win these kind of skirmishes or these kind of conflicts, because right from the very get-go, before you even get to the point where you're making content, you've already lost that battle, because all Nintendo has to do is say like, hey, we just want this down, and they're able to do it. And legally, you're going to have no defense against it, even fair use, because from the very get-go, it's just you kind of give up that right almost, even though it's a little bit funky with the wording, but that's essentially, at least for this application, what really happens. So what about review copies, like early access to stuff when you're media? Like Jay was saying in there, sometimes you get early access to copies. You get those emails that say that they're confidential. Sometimes, depending on the company and depending on the publisher, and also depending on the game, you'll end up signing an NDA. I've had to sign most of those, especially for a lot of bigger games that I've released that I've had early or way in advance before anybody else got them. Perfect example of this that I could talk about that has happened, Kingdom Hearts 3. A lot of Square Enix games I've dealt with that. I've had to sign NDAs. Destiny 2 was another one, because I actually went to the Destiny 2 preview event with other media, from other websites like IGN, Polygon, Kotaku, and all this stuff. We all got flown out by Bungie to Seattle, to Bungie's offices to go play Destiny 2. Back in the day, and we had to sign NDAs and play it, and we got copies of the game, afterwards and stuff for our own content. So this type of stuff happens. The reason why that's relevant here is because when you're in that echelon, when you're doing stuff like that, whenever somebody breaks street date or breaks an NDA, it's a very serious matter. And I don't think that a lot of people really understand just how serious and how crazy it could get. You're looking at like legal stuff, like stuff where you could actually be sued and actually like sent to the Shadow Realm for the most part. With Nintendo, personally for me, in my opinion, and in the opinion of other people I've spoken to over the years, Nintendo is the most notorious when it comes to really going after people for this type of stuff. One story I can mention that I'm pretty sure some of you could go out and look up some of the stuff to get more specifics, but I'm going to speak in general terms here. There was one example of like a Nintendo brand ambassador that was getting games from Nintendo early, as a brand ambassador, because they're following their audience and also because of their connection to other YouTubers that have larger audiences. They ended up getting games early and selling them to other YouTubers, which is a whole nother can of worms. So it's not only that you're kind of breaking the NDA that you signed with Nintendo, or the agreement that you signed with Nintendo as a brand ambassador getting these games early, but now you're selling those games and actually making a profit on it. Like those are the type of stuff that gets crazy. But again, that's not really applicable to specifically RGT85 situation. The point is that it's breaking the date and breaking the street date in his case. And when that happens, because Nintendo's so controlling with the way that they actually want to, make sure people see their games in a little bit more of a positive light, admittedly so, but they also want to see it in a fair light in some ways. So when you start seeing stuff like that, and it's things where they're kind of just like not feeling it and they're not liking it per se, you're going to see them be a little bit more aggressive going after people or taking down videos or doing whatever else. And again, like I mentioned before, most of the time they're going to win that, because before anything else, by playing a Nintendo game, you agree to their terms of service that gives them the ability to do something like that. Even though, again, you could say that YouTube is able to kind of like stop people from doing so. But if things were really going to kind of come to a head and they were going to show up with the Nintendo ninjas or the Nintendo lawyers, more than like 99% of the time, they're going to win that out. But again, I'm just saying some people might not like that, but it's the truth, honestly. Now, the other aspect about this that was actually touched upon that Rich had mentioned that, very briefly, he didn't mention it in full, is about like, people tattletaling on other creators, which is true. That does happen. But most of the time when companies do find out about other people breaking NDAs or breaking street dates, it's not really because of people tattletaling just because they're vindictive. It's most of the time, from my experience, from what I've seen and also what I've been involved with, was where you see other creators or other people in the media will see people break street date or they'll break NDA, and they'll go to their PR contact and ask like, yo, like what the hell? Like, why is it that we got to follow this embargo or this NDA while this other person is breaking it? And it's not being done out of malicious intent. It's being done more and being brought up because it's not fair. Like the landscape is just not always equal like that. And the PR people are always trying to make sure that everybody follows the embargoes, everybody follows their NDAs. So when that happens, that's when you usually see like them go after people as well. Again, you usually find that type of scenario amongst media people. Or in my case, like there was one time I remember seeing a bunch of other like websites, like smaller websites, breaking an NDA or breaking an embargo. Like I think it was like a couple days, if not a week in advance. And I went to my contact. I'm like, yo, like I'm over here. I got my content done, ready to go. But what's up with this? Like these are the only sites that are doing this. Like, are we allowed to post up? Like, what's the deal? Sometimes they'll tell us to wait it out and then they just go deal with that, or they end up blacklisting people. Or in a couple rare cases, and I can't remember which specific games this happened with me in that case, but it usually sometimes it'll happen where they'll just be like, you know what, everybody could just post their content now then. It's very rare that that does happen, but it does happen here and there. The other thing too, I should mention as well, when it comes to street date, I personally, for me, and again, this is my own personal belief, when it comes to street date, I think that a lot of people are liable for this type of stuff, or that they should face the consequences from the company, not just the store that gave you that game. Because again, that's a whole legal thing where they're just going into other territory where they consciously are doing that from the get-go. But also the creator, like you can't have a lot of sympathy for the creator when they know that they're getting over. And I always say this, and I've said this even in my comments on Rich's video, is that a lot of creators usually are trying to get over. They're trying to get that extra edge because they're trying to play the game with YouTube. They're trying to, be relevant and be, in the spotlight enough so they could get viewers and views and all this other stuff. So they know exactly what they're doing more than like 90% of the time. So it's a little hard to have a little empathy and sympathy when they kind of get caught, or at least they start facing consequences for the actions that they've taken. You see, what's weird about this is that a lot of other creators, especially Nintendo creators, at least in this case, what we're talking about here, you see a lot of them always trying to make excuses and trying to like paint a certain way of like certain actions that are going down. They're always demonizing either Nintendo or some of the people that are calling them out on this stuff. And it's like, listen, if you knew you were getting a game that was before street date, if you knew that you signed an NDA or that you made an agreement on an email, if you go out and publish that email, if you go out and say that you got this game in this way, you're already kind of like, implicating yourself. You're already setting yourself up for a bad time for the most part. It's just weird like that. I could tell you guys a story, right? There was another Nintendo brand ambassador where it was someone that I knew had gotten the game earlier and had the same NDA/agreements as I did for another Nintendo game. I won't say the game because I don't want to put this person on blast, or I don't want you guys to go crazy like with the person that I'm bringing up. But this person I knew had the same stuff as me, but then like not even a day or two prior to it, I saw them playing the game on a live stream where a bunch of other people saw that, and other Nintendo brand ambassadors were in their stream talking. So all these people who literally had the same thing as me agreeing to not do content prior to the embargo or prior to a specific date, that they ended up all doing the same thing and participating in this content when that was going on. It's just absolutely nuts how sometimes that could happen. And for the record, which really sucks for a lot of people, sometimes it's just not given the same fairness. Because in that instance, in the one that I mentioned, a lot of those people didn't suffer any consequences. They didn't get blacklisted. They didn't get any of that stuff. Personally, for me, in my own opinion, I think it had a lot to do with their audiences, because sometimes a lot of their audiences are pretty large, so they kind of get this big head where they can start bending the rules a little bit for them, which is not fair, in all honesty. And it's not even just for me. There was other creators at the time that had that game that were following their NDAs and were waiting to put out their content, and they were just missing out on views and missing out on traffic that they could have gotten if everybody was all on the same level playing fields. It's a lot of stuff that could be fixed up with the system or just the way that, again, PR approaches stuff, but it is what it is. And sometimes you just gotta, just roll with it and just keep going afterwards and not harp on it too much. We're just talking about stories now, in the application of this stuff, but again, it is what it is. Now, in my own personal opinion, with RGT85, much like how Jay and Rich had said, he came out and admitted, exactly what he did. So at that point, like I said, it's hard to have sympathy. It's hard to have empathy if you're coming out and trying to give off this perception that the audience should have sympathy for you, that Nintendo's like coming after you, Nintendo's treating you a certain way, they're being salty because you criticize the game and stuff. Not really. When you really look at all the facts here and you start looking at the entire landscape of what's gone down. So I don't think RGT85 is going to be in a bad position. I think it's going to be a little bit more difficult for him to like get review codes or review copies of Nintendo stuff, or even become a Nintendo brand ambassador, because I don't even think he is at this point. But it is what it is. And at that point, you just move on. You buy your games at the point if you're able to buy your games, hopefully on street date, in his case, instead of like attracting the Nintendo ninjas, for anything else. But he'll be just fine. I don't think it's the end of the world with him. It's not like I've seen with other people, like I mentioned before, like selling copies of games to other creators before street date. There was another one I could mention too as like a final one. A long time ago, there was a game that I remember that was coming out on Nintendo 3DS. Again, I won't say the name of the game, but a lot of you out there are savvy enough to figure out what this is. There was a game that was on Nintendo 3DS that had got leaked out, that actually got ROM dumped. And it was super early before it was released here in the United States. And a couple brand ambassadors and other people that were getting games from Nintendo were ending up playing and doing Let's Plays of it online. And Nintendo was going around like chopping them up, like hitting them with the Nintendo ninjas when that happens, because those same people were also agreeing to NDAs, or were also in the brand ambassadorship, trying to hopefully get that same game later on when it was applicable to here in the United States. And again, it's just one of those weird things where the landscape is just not the same. It's just so uneven in certain cases. Some people were suffering bad consequences. Some people made it out okay, and then they just shut up and just moved on, or bragged about it later on. It was just a weird time overall. So anyway, just wanted to give that insight, give my perspective, and give my thoughts. Hopefully at some point me, Rich, and his editor could talk about it some more in depth, and actually swap stories, because there's a lot of stuff that you guys that are not part of the industry, you guys don't get to see, you guys don't get exposed to as much, but it's really relevant and really kind of key and important for a lot of things that you do see happen, or whenever you see people talk about being part of the industry or covering games and stuff like that, because with the extra context and the extra information, it paints a much more clearer picture of like how things usually are when it comes to this stuff. But as always, that's just my thoughts about all these things. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments section. Leave a like on this video, and of course, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Check out some of the other episodes of JJ's One Man Podcast that I have on the channel right now that you guys can enjoy, as well as also my reviews. Again, I have a ton of reviews right now. I just did my review of BioShock 2 earlier this week, and I got a brand new one coming up next Wednesday that you guys are definitely going to want to look into, because I'm trying to get stuff done before Knights of the Old Republic comes out on Switch. I'm really hyped up for that. Going to be doing a video about that eventually. So anyway, I will talk to all of you again very soon. Peace out and stay epic, everybody.